Okay, hi everyone, Tara back here, and today I am sitting with Catherine Corey, who is going to chat with us about a few different topics. But first, I just wanted to give you a chance, Catherine, to introduce yourself and just thank you for joining me and taking the time to do this. So if we want to jump right in and just if you could tell me a little bit about who you are, what you do. I already know, so just for everyone else out there.
My name is Catherine Corey, and I'm a relationship coach, and I've been doing coaching for, probably at least 20 years. It is a passion of mine, having struggled in my childhood with relationships, and also, have been married and divorced a few times. I was really curious and have investigated and researched why my relationships weren't working, and discovered tools and concepts and ideas along the way that helped me and actually helped a lot of my clients and continue to do so. So that's what my passion is, for sure. So clearly, I work in conjunction with Clarity Divorce, and my role there is really to help people get clarity about whether or not they want to stay in a relationship or leave a relationship. And I'm able to give them some information and some skills that they didn't have, because oftentimes in our relationships now, we get stuck at places, the same places we got stuck in our childhood, not getting what we need. And what I'm able to share with a lot of people is that it's really because we have some misinformation and we are lacking some skills to really understand how relationships need to work for us. So in our selection of partners, whether or not it is a good selection or not a good selection really needs to come from clearness or clarity around what we need from our relationships.
Yeah, that makes sense. So today, from what I understand, that you are chatting with us about locked down with your significant other. So moving to what's happening with the COVID pandemic and everything like that, people are finding themselves with a lot more quality time than we have previously been used to. And we were actually just talking about this, how, for some couples, that's going to be really difficult. And so, so from what I understand, you're going to share with us some information about that and really get into it.
Well, because the first thing that I want couples to understand and people in general to understand is that all of us as human beings have what we call a stress response. And in this particular situation, we're talking about the stress response. It's whether or not we have that in terms of a threat. And usually when I talk about it, is it a real threat or a perceived threat? Well, in this case, it actually is a real threat. So we're actually having a very normal bodily reaction to a very real threat. And that stress response, and it's so important to understand it to be able to work with it, is a huge challenge. It actually may be a larger challenge than the pandemic itself. And the reason for that is because when we're in this stress response, and I think people are familiar with it as being the fight, flight, or freeze response, it actually taps our resources. So our bodies are designed to protect ourselves. So we will move energy, we will move and create hormones and something called cortisol. And so when we're in this stress response for a while, because it's about protecting us from an external threat, it takes away some of our ability to protect ourselves from disease. So it actually lowers our immune system. So here's one of the things. We're facing a real threat, but it's kind of an unseen threat. So for many of us in the stress response, we can go to a fight, flight, or freeze. Okay? But in this particular case, unless we're actually frontline workers and we have a job to do, we might not identify with, well, what exactly it is that I can do in terms of fighting this, right? So one of the things that I want to let everybody know is that the powerful thing that you can do in order to help fight this is really support and strengthen your immune system. So that means dealing with this fight, flight, or the stress response, the fight, flight, or freeze.
Yeah.
So in amongst couples, probably you'd be more familiar with the fight one. So the fight is when we are expressing this response, this bodily response, by being angry. Well, that's one. Or by acting impulsively is another way in which it might show up. But oftentimes we can see it as anger. So what I've been hearing amongst couples lately is, and their usual favorite top target is the other person.
Mm-hmm.
Because anger itself requires focus, direction, and a target. So it can be the other person, or we might be hearing, I don't know, on social media where people are really angry with the behaviors of other people, and they're blaming, and they're critical, and they're really upset. So it does need a place and a particular focus. So that could be happening in terms of couples when they're going, huh, we didn't used to fight this much, but we're fighting all the time. And they're being sensitive about it, and they're talking about, you know, little things that are going on in the house, and fights and arguments are erupting. And that is really challenging, because that particular response creates a real sense of, I said, walls, barriers, a discomfort. It's really unpleasant.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Because I think a lot of people don't recognize, because I know even, you know, for myself, you don't sit here and think like, oh, I'm in fight, flight, or freeze. Like, oh, I'm perceiving that there is a danger. But when you say it like that and you explain it like that, I can completely see the draining of my own like resources, like, you know, feeling exhausted, feeling unmotivated, like some of those kinds of things, because there is that perceived threat, real threat that we are seeing out there. So, and I can see how that would transfer into the home in those responses as well, right? Because right now we don't really have any other outlets. I mean, hopefully we'll learn some tools from you on how to deal with them, but if you don't know, right, then you're sitting there and you are entering into that anger, and you are expressing it to the other person or to your children or to whoever, and you're not even really understanding it, which then is, you know, is like that vicious cycle, right? Because then you're like, I don't understand, like, why am I so angry? And then it's like one of those like cycle things that start to happen. So in
And
the
I was going to say, just before I go on, and the other thing in there, not only does it lower your immune system, but it puts us into self-preservation.
Mhm.
So we become more focused on ourselves. So instead of, you know, thinking about we're a unit, we're a family, we're together, we go into very protective, because we then are trying to, particularly when it's two that are fighting, we go into wanting to protect or defend ourselves from the other. So the other becomes a threat as well.
Right,
So
that makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah. So what if two people are experiencing the fight response? Like, so if, you know, you're a couple and you're going through this, and both of you are experiencing having the fight response.
So what I'm saying is, the first is to be aware that that's what's going on, and it's being fed by this external threat, right? So again, if we focus that it's something outside, and our goal together is to actually support our immune system. So it's going, okay, so I want to support my immune system. So I want to reduce the stress. So I need to reduce the fighting. So can we agree to work on this together? Right? So that's the first, is like having the common goal, the client kind of, let's do this. This is what we can do. We can make sure that we're as healthy as possible by doing this. And so then there are some techniques and strategies. So if you happen to be a yeller, a screamer, or like to be into the verbal fight, then what I suggest you do is to do it in what I consider a healthier way. So you can actually use fighting words, because what we're needing to do is express the energy so we can move out of the fight and go back to relax, and relax and calm supports the immune system. Right?
Right.
So I know clients say, well, that's really funny. And I go, well, you can pick any word, whatever word you want, you pick a word, and then you use it as if you're fighting with all your might with the other person. So you can use peanut butter, right? But instead of using words that actually hurt and harm our relationships, we're really doing the expression of it. If that's the thing that we're liking to do, we want to be verbal, we want to be that kind of thing. If the partners aren't comfortable doing that, then the other thing that I suggest is like an empty chair. So imagine that they or whoever, right? Because it could be that you want to be angry about something else, or that you want to be angry at the virus, whatever it is that you want to be angry with. You focus, you imagine, because as human beings, we can actually imagine and visualize and go back to being a kid, we pretend. And again, express our anger verbally, and maybe even a little bit physically. If there's a pillow there that you need to punch, you just need to, do that kind of thing. If that's your feeling that you're pent up, get the fists going, you're gonna do that kind of thing. But again, where you're not harming your relationships, you're not harming your environment, but you're actually getting the release, right? So that you're expressing it in that particular way. And really to validate that it's okay to feel this way. So that when you're doing it or your partner's doing it, this is a valid response. It's a human response. It's a normal response. What we need to do is express it in a healthier way, so that we're not hurting the people that we actually need to have supportive of us.
Right, that makes sense. So, okay, so that's the fight response. So this one's interesting. So the flight response, because we're not really able to like leave the house or whatever the situation might be. So how do you manage the flight response inside of you?
So I would say, so the flight response may be a little bit more challenging, because sometimes people don't actually recognize it, because they're going, okay, well, I can't leave the house, so bonus. They tend not to have as much challenge about not leaving the house. But where you might see it is they're having trouble getting out of bed. They're withdrawing into excessive amounts of video games or watching movies. They're not interacting. They're not engaging.
Okay, so it's not necessarily like a physical flight. It could also be a mental, emotional flight, if you will.
Absolutely. So the kind of like the action or in it is to withdraw. Right? Withdraw and hide.
Okay.
Right? So the anger one is about action, needing to do something, needing to focus, to move out, right, into doing. The flight is withdrawing and hiding. Okay. Now that tends to be less of a challenge for some people, but again, in couples, when that's happening and we are wanting connection time and the other person is withdrawing all the time, whether or not it's video games or TV, or I always say, or into their favorite beverage, alcohol, anything like that that's done excessively, right, can cause strain in the relationship. Right. And it also, when you're doing that, it also has an impact on your immune system, because it's your response to the stress. Right. So you're like pulling in. It's like turtling all the way in, right?
Right. So, because then you're no longer using those things to like say like self-care or relax or to feed yourself. You're doing it more as a response to the threat that you're experiencing and this response to the stress. So it has an adverse effect.
Yeah, and it can look like depression. So you also have to be aware of, okay, when this is happening, what is it that I'm feeling? Am I feeling like I need to withdraw, or am I feeling like I need to act, right? So know what response that you happen to be in. And what am I thinking? What are the thoughts that are going on with this?
Right. Okay, and so if, like, let's say you're in a relationship and you notice that your spouse or partner is participating in more of the flight response, is there anything as their partner that you can do?
Well, the first thing is to know what response you're in.
Right.
So I would say that, know what response you're in it, claim it, be aware of it, validate, yes, this is what's going on, right? And I would say, and don't make somebody's behaviors wrong. It's like being encouraging and supporting and having the conversation about it. So you're observing and noticing, and you want to support a different behavior. So if you're actually in the flight or withdraw, then your thing about it is to behave differently than where it is that you're going, right? So you're going, okay, so then you need to be more mindful about making connections and about engaging. So if that's your tendency to go to withdraw, it's to make a point of, with your partner or significant other, to set up time where you're actually connecting or engaging. And you're going to do the same thing. If you're withdrawing, then it's about connecting and engaging with other people, either, you know, getting on a Zoom call or Skype, but actually making the effort to do something.
Right.
Maybe even to take a walk or to take action, because your tendency in the reaction is to withdraw, is to do something else. So as a partner, it's to invite them into the other activity.
Right.
Validate that you get it, understand it, right? There's an awareness around it because we're having this discussion, and having that discussion, and then move into a different kind of activity.
Okay, that makes
But
sense.
again, when you're looking at stress response, you don't want to create more stress.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So it's not about conflict, it's about awareness, validating that the feelings are real, that our responses are real, and that our responsibility or our best thing in fighting this is to support our immune system, and moving ourselves out of that to balance it supports our immune system.
Right. That makes sense. So then moving on, there's the third one, which is the freeze response.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that, like, now I'm confused, like, what does that really look like the freeze response, and how can you manage that?
The freeze response often looks like total indecision.
Okay.
So somebody who can't make a decision, you know, they waffle from one thing to the other. It's kind of like being in an anxious state, but not really moving or doing anything anywhere.
Right.
So I'm not hiding, I'm not angry, but I'm anxious and I'm indecisive. So the easiest way to tell is the indecision.
Right.
Because what they're looking for is some kind of guidance. Somebody needs to let them know what they need to do.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. And so how can that be managed?
Well, again, I would say it's awareness and understanding if that's where you tend to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are you in the indecisive kind of thing?
Mm-hmm.
Then, you know, one of the practices that I suggest is mindful breathing, because you want to move yourself out of the anxiety. So you really want to just move into breathing, and then also look at, you know, what are my thoughts, what's going on in my mind, and how do I organize what's going on there, like in terms of how do I make a decision, what's a good way to make a decision.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those is looking at, well, what am I in control of and what am I not in control of? Because
Right.
sometimes we go to indecision because we think we can control things external to us. So maybe I can control the spread of COVID. Maybe
Right.
I can control here. Maybe I can, right? That kind of thing. Or what's going on here. I think on social media, you hear a lot of the debates.
Yeah.
Right? But it's looking internally and going, okay, so what's important to me? What are my priorities? How do I make my decisions?
Right.
Okay. So again, in a partner, it's actually looking at that. Okay. So how are we making our decisions? What are we basing it on? Who's our authority? Is it external or is it based on our family values?
Right. That makes sense. Yeah.
So again,
And
I mean, supporting somebody in that place is, again, I mean, it's the awareness and the validation, because each of us could actually flip between all three.
right.
Right. And what I'm always saying when I'm working with couples, work with you. It's so easy to focus on what somebody else is doing or not doing. And the
Yeah.
same thing in partners. It's so easy to focus on what they are doing or not doing, but it's really about ownership. If this speaks to you, then pay attention, be aware of it for you, own it for you, model it for you.
Right. Right. That makes sense, because we're always trying to look for things outside of ourselves a lot of times, when, you know, making the change or the acknowledgement within ourselves is where it really needs to start for everyone, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's easier on your partnerships, because if you work on trying to make them adhere and support their immune system, then
Mhm.
you're actually contrary to your own. So if you're looking at relaxing and breathing into yours and supporting somebody else and encouraging them, but not insisting,
Right.
then it's more helpful in a partnership.
Right. That makes sense. So, okay. Do you find that, so I know you said that people can flip between the three. Do you
Mhm.
find that generally people have a more like go-to response?
Absolutely.
Mostly? Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Well, you'll know it in yours. I mean, in our everyday life, we go, oh yeah, if I'm under stress, what's my most likely thing I'm going to do?
Right. Right.
Right?
And so knowing that about yourself can also be of benefit in this type of situation, because knowing what your default response is can be helpful in this, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then do you find that people will flip-flop because of different, like what would cause somebody, so like let's say you automatically go to your default, and what would cause somebody to like jump from one to the other?
If it's not working,
Okay.
right? And depending upon how long we happen to be in it, right? Because the immediate fight or flight response, lots of people might go to fight, but the longer you're in that stress response, depends upon what it is that you're thinking, right?
Mhm.
As long as you feel like taking an action is going to be helpful, right? You're going to move into that energy of action, which is the anger. You're going to do something. But if you lose hope, right? So that threat, if you lose hope, then you may go to a different response. Does that
Right.
make sense?
Yeah.
Right? So again, it depends on, you know, whether or not you're, and I said the other important thing is whether or not you're feeding yourself positivity or negativity.
Right.
Right? So if you're a pessimist and you're feeding yourself a lot of negativity, you may cycle through into the complete withdrawal hide.
Right. Right. That makes sense. Okay. So really it comes down to being self-aware and, you know, in the moments, recognizing what you're thinking, feeling, saying to yourself, all of that kind of stuff, so that you can acknowledge when you're stepping into any of these responses.
Yes, and then how to express it healthily and bring yourself back to calm.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So are you, so this is really good information. I feel like we could talk about this like all day.
And we could,
Yeah.
because there's lots of strategies and techniques in order to get you there. So that's one of the things that we're going to talk about more, some practical strategies in terms of self-awareness to continually bring yourself back to a more calm and peaceful place, because there's
Yeah.
lots of things that you can put into place. And I would say, and they go around having the awareness and the information and how to manage things so that you reduce the conflict and stress within your home, within your relationships.
Right. That makes sense. So, okay, so today we went over the information about the stress response and the effects that it can have, and what it looks like. So now we need to kind of take that back and start acknowledging where we're at, what responses we're participating in, and what's happening. And then from there we can, I know next week we're chatting again and we're talking about the actual strategies for these responses, right?
Right.
Okay. Now, if couples are feeling overwhelmed and like they can't get themselves out of this hamster wheel and stuff, like, are you still providing services virtually?
I certainly am. I am providing services by video chat or by phone, so I can be accessed by email.
Okay.
at,
Okay. Okay.
at
So
Catherine
people
at
can still,
spiritwalk.ca.
okay, so people can still reach out to you, and to be able to either have like individual sessions or together if necessary.
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much for doing this for us. And I'm really excited to hear about next week, because I know I can use some of these strategies too. So yeah, so like I said, thank you for doing this, and we will catch back up next week.
Okay.